Yeah, absolutely. We've seen on stream Affinity just be absolutely explosive in those game ones, take those games down easily, and then try and win one of two in the post-board games. But in this matchup, Owen has quite a good all the tools that he needs in order to be able to win a game one in this matchup. And before we get too deep into this, I just want to give a shout out to our other quarterfinals players. Number one seed Keith Capstick, hard fought loss. Congratulations to him for the top 8. And Alvaro as well with Grixis midrange. What an interesting deck to bring to this tournament. And he had an amazing success for it. Would have liked to be able to see it on stream at some point, but unfortunately he did lose the other quarterfinal match. But a good tournament for him as well.
Yeah, just some unbelievably, and you get when you're one of those quarterfinal players who lose, it's you got those interesting emotions. You're so happy for what you've achieved, but you also knew that here you're only 2 matches away from the Magic the Gathering World Championship, which is an incredibly massive achievement, a massive accomplishment. But you can't take much away from them. Top 8, an incredibly stacked regional championship with over 300 players, an incredibly difficult field. But now we are down to only 4 players. On the other side of the bracket, in our backup feature match, we have Aiden Mirabelli trying to slay the Titan again. We saw him beat Dom Harvey 2-0 in what we thought was a pretty difficult matchup for Boros Energy. But this time, a big shift is happening, which is that Aiden is going to be on the draw playing against Isaac Fox, our second seed in the tournament.
Yeah,
It looks like we're already getting into it with the main feature.
Oh, that's great. And we get to see turn 1 Pithing Needle. That's exciting. What would you name? Turn 1 Pithing Needle. What are you naming against this Jeskai Blink deck?
Against the Jeskai Blink deck, you have 2 options. You have one, which is, or you have 3 options, I guess. You have Teferi Time Raveler, of which there are 2 of. You can choose the backside of Fable, the reflection of Kiki Jiki. But if I'm Gavin, I'm picking Arid Mesa or Flooded Strand, the 2 fetch lands, of which there are 4 of. And I am crossing my fingers.
Yeah, absolutely. Those cards to Fairy is okay. Reflection, okay. So slow to get to it, but if you manage to snipe the fetch land that is in Owen's hand, that is absolutely massive. And we see Scalding Tarn played on turn 1. Likely not the one that was named because, again, that one does not have 4 copies in the deck. So you want to remember this is an open deck list tournament. We know that Owen's list is 4 Arid Mesa, 4 Flooded Strand, 3 Scalding Tarn. So Scalding Tarn, probably not the name if Gavin is playing the odds. And that's why Owen plays at turn 1, as it probably was not the one that was named. But looking at his hand, if we do spot a fetch line in there, and in a game, if it goes long, it absolutely will come up. But Gavin, not doing too much other than this. He's got a Memnite on board, another Memnite, and a Shadow Spear. This is not the explosive start that we're used to seeing from the Izzet Affinity deck.
Yeah, even getting cast a Thoughtcast on 2, it's a hand that can set up for some big future prospects, but you don't. Thoughtcast it's good. It's one of those solid cards, in between cards that can bridge you from these small threats or from the small little artifacts into the big threats like that Kappa Cannoneer, like Urga Saga, like Pinnacle Emissary. But it's not a threat in its own. Again, if you're just casting Thoughtcast and drawing into more Memnites, that's not a winning strategy. And Gavin, you gotta assume because that Mishra's Bauble has not been sacrificed yet, that he has some powerful cards in hand already. Otherwise, you'd think he'd be cycling to look for new things. But so that's got to spell a little bit of alarm bells going off for Owen, who you hope has some level of interaction for some of these artifacts that are going to come down from Gavin.
Yeah, Kappa Cannoneer coming down next turn could be devastating, but Gavin, knowing the matchup, could go, okay, maybe somewhere else you just mulligan to your most explosive draws. You want to put Kappa into play on turn 2 if you're playing against a deck like Amulet Titan. But knowing Jeskai Blink, he wants to be able to grind. He wants to be able to just do something solid, make sure that his draw is functional, try and use that Pithing Needle to slow down Owen, and then maybe a turn 3 Kappa Cannoneer is good enough, could be good enough because of that massive Ward 4. It would take Owen a Solitude on turn 4, paying the entire ward cost in order to answer a Kappa Cannoneer.
Yeah, and there's one of those threats we talked about in the Urza Saga. We also did just get confirmation that Gavin has named Flooded Strand with the Pithing Needle, so we'll see if that ends up being relevant. But Gavin is putting in a lot of artifacts in play, Engineered Explosives on 0, and looking to tap those things sideways. And that Pithing Needle is not attacking. This has got to be the Kappa Cannoneer.
Oh yeah, it's coming down. Owen knows it. That Engineered Explosives resolving, but now a little bit of a think from Gavin after it goes into play.
Maybe
But
some
ultimately
fear of the
does,
Strict Serenade from the Jeskai Blink player.
that is the one main deck way that Owen could have that would completely change the game. But no, there is no Strict Serenade, and it looks like it's just going to be Ophelia coming down. That it gets countered by Metallic Rebuke. So now, not only has Gavin been able to deploy his own super powerful threat, but has totally prevented Owen from developing any of his own.
And possibly a slight misstep from Owen not playing the Felia with the Kappa Cannoneer on the stack, giving Gavin Bennett the ability to use that for the Metallic Rebuke, may end up being kind of punishing here. And now, if you're Owen, you really need something to get off the board. I'm looking at the main way that these Jeskai Blink decks can deal with Kappa Cannoneers. You can go Evoke Solitude, target the Kappa Cannoneer, and then you can consign both the Solitude Evoke trigger and the Kappa Cannoneer Ward trigger, and that lets you keep your 3/2 lifelink and get rid of the big turtle. But it is threatening to close the game very quickly, and even if Owen's able to get rid of a bunch of cards to take it off the board, there's still an Urza Saga there, and that's threatening to make some massive constructs.
Yeah, good shout out. Otherwise, if he does not have that Solitude consigned play, he's taking at least one big hit from the Cannoneer before, and then it's an Arid Mesa that Owen played. So a little bit unlucky with the name that Gavin did. He named Flooded Strand, and then Owen goes, okay, I'll play Scalding Tarn and Arid Mesa. It was the right one to name, I guess, but as it turns out, wrong as Owen's hand has actually turned out. And he's fetching up planes right now, which means he might be going for one of those plays that you mentioned, or it could just be something like a Flage or a Fable setting up to be able to do something powerful on the turn later and take a big hit now.
Yeah, if you're Owen, you're gotta look for something a little bit bigger than just playing a Fable, just playing a Teferi. These are two small ball plays. You've got to hope that your turn involves something. In this Teferi Time Rebel, yeah, you can bounce. There's a Saga, but that is that is a small bandage on a huge problem, and Gavin is looking like he's in an incredibly commanding position.
Well, that's true. Yeah, this Kappa Cannoneer is guaranteed getting in one hit now. But if you do only have the Solitude and nothing else, Teferi is kind of the best card you could have here because it just delays that construct coming in one whole turn. So the Saga comes down, then the Solitude answers the Cannoneer, and then you have one turn break from getting hit with something massive.
Gavin, no cheap artifact, or perhaps attempting to. It looks like he's choosing to go with two Memnites at the Teferi, really prioritizing getting that creature off the board.
Yeah, because the usual trick is to attack the Teferi with +1 creature needed to kill it, just to play around the possibility of Owen having a Solitude. Now, I'm sure that if Owen does have a Solitude, there is no way he's using it on a Memnite to save his Teferi. So Gavin playing a little cautious around Solitude, but if you manage to bait out a Solitude on a Memnite just to have a Teferi stick around, I would say that you would be very happy that Owen is using it in that way.
Yeah, a pretty conservative play that I'm a bit surprised of by Gavin Bennett. I wonder if that one life point is going to make a difference. You got to think if the Kappa Cannoneer sticks on the board, it's not going to. But some of these games where you can see a lot of them where Affinity gets in with the big creatures early, and then the control or mid-range deck's able to stymie the bleeding, and a couple drones or Memnites get in for those last few points of damage. It is often a matchup on these big swings, but anything can really happen in terms of these little points mattering. So you gotta have to see if that one life point's gonna change things up. And another Scalding Tarn. Gavin feels cursed by the choice to name Flooded Strand. You can see him give a bit of smile there.
Yeah, always nice that you still can keep the humor of it in this high pressure spot. A mountain being fetched out as Owen realizing that his life total is paramount, can't afford to take any additional damage that isn't absolutely necessary. And if you look at 4 mana plays in his deck, there's not too many. So I think it's reasonably likely we're just seeing a Solitude, Ward, and that's all for Owen's turn. But unless
It's not a great answer, but you've got to do
but
something.
we're not. He taps 3, so it's going to be a 3+1 that he's going to do instead, and that means that the Cannoneer is going to stick around for another turn. Flage comes down. Maybe he can consign his own Flage, and that would be something powerful to stay on the board.
You guys, he's not reaching to put in the graveyard just yet. I spoke too soon.
No.
And you see a Solitude in hand, but perhaps no other white card? No, I see it looks like a March of Otherworldly Light. Maybe deems that doing that on the Urza Saga is too important.
Yeah, Urza Saga, if it can make a construct, you
Looks like
take.
Oh, an interesting choice from Owen, choosing to go with the upkeep of the March of Otherworldly Light. That did give Gavin the window to crack that Fiery Islet into potentially drawing a Metallic Rebuke, but ended up not having it. And Gavin may be getting kind of close to running out of steam here if he can't get lethal this turn.
Well, he drew a card off the islet this turn, but that Thoughtcast completely changes that. Now he's back up to 3 cards in hand, and if he finds a Metallic Rebuke, that would completely shut Owen's way to get back into this game.
I think it's one artifact off lethal already. This looks like this is 6-7 damage, putting him to 1 life.
Well, he must have drawn either a lot of lands or a rebuke, and Owen must be praying that it's lands.
Yeah, he doesn't have much. And we see here, Owen is at 1 life. If that second Memnite went upstairs, this game would be over. It may not matter, but that these tiny things could make a huge difference. And Owen is maybe manages to get a Solitude here. That could be enough. Even plays through potentially a Metallic Rebuke. Who knows?
Yeah, that's true because of the way the consign replicate works, if he manages to assemble that combo. But given that he didn't have consign last turn, it is just going to be a Flage that he's going for now, which gains 3 life, and that is the rebuke, and that ends the game.
Yeah, you'd have to imagine Gavin had to have something there, and it wasn't all. The Affinity deck plays a famously low amount of lands. Most of them either cycle into other lands or get to, have backside abilities or Urza Saga, and you got to assume there's something. And you can see Gavin, I assume, still chuckling about that Flooded Strand name, but I'm content having a blank card in my Affinity deck if I'm putting a Kappa Cannoneer into play early. And we'll have to see how these games progress into sideboarding. What is Owen looking to do here?
Yeah, so we have these 3 Wrath of the Skies. Basically the Ashiok, the Surgical High Noon, not for this matchup, because of how Affinity can deploy their entire hand to High Noon would not be effective. It could come down too slow. So probably not what he's looking for there. However, the Strix Serenade, Mystical Dispute, March, Wrath of the Skies, these are real game changers, and probably boarding down on some of the more clunky threats or interaction spells that don't actually stop Gavin's creatures as well. So probably some number of all those 3-mana things, Flage, Teferi, Fable, trimming on those a little bit, perhaps Ephemerate coming out, Consign doing the job a little stronger there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You got to think if you're Owen, you don't hate your chances to win a couple of these games down 1 with a full suite of Wraths, March. But we've seen there's a reason this Affinity deck sticks around and is so powerful, is that just because your opponent puts 3 Wrath of the Skies into their sideboard does not mean the game's over. We see some alternative threats here from Gavin. Emery is such a classic way for this deck to fight through disruption. He has his own counter spells with some Mystical Dispute, potentially bringing in this Force of Negation. I would assume it's probably going to have to come in against 3 Wrath. Fable the Mirror Breaker seems like a pretty solid card. And apart from that, it doesn't seem like you want to make too many changes. The Affinity deck is so powerful that it has sometimes a cap on how many cards it can bring in, because you start to really lose that velocity when you replace cheap artifacts with, blue counter spells.
Yeah, absolutely. The Force Negation probably be chosen because of its power against the Wrath of the Skies, allowing you to fully deploy your board, overextend into it, completely tap out, and that player thinks that they're safe. They cast the Wrath, you have the Force, and then you win the game. But something about Wrath of the Skies is Kappa Cannoneer, if you can get down Kappa Cannoneer before the Wrath of the Skies comes in, sometimes it's enough on its own. you lose everything else, but those 5 artifacts that you put into play to cast the Kappa, well, they've done their job already.
Yeah, I know a lot of people I've talked to who are really interested in Affinity, who played at the last Pro Tour, said they weren't actually that scared of Wrath of the Skies because it was just too slow. But Meltdown was the real killer because of how cheap it was. So, the Affinity deck can be so fast and get these permanents of pretty high mana values into play quickly. And it's not like the Boros Energy deck where they can generate energy from a ton of different places. It's a lot more limited coming out of this Jeskai Blink deck that doesn't play, any copies of Galvanic Discharge or Guide of Souls.
Yeah, I would be almost more worried about Strix Serenade and March to Otherworldly Light answering the Kappa and the Saga, and then only fear Wrath of the Skies later to clean up the board. And we're going to take a look into what looks to be game 2 of our backup feature match. Aiden on the draw did lose game 1, as it seems, but he opens game 2 in a powerful way with the Plains into Guide of Souls.
And you always see when the Plains comes off that first fetch land or the second fetch land, it's a telling story that Blood Moon is likely in the future, or at least Aiden's planning around drawing it. And we'll have to see, this Titan deck. We talked about how powerful it is. This matchup can be really tough for energy, especially on the draw. But Aiden set his deck up pretty well post board. Nice little attack there. Excellently done block from Isaac Fox, and we'll have to see how Aiden follows up because you need to combine that pressure with disruption. If we get a nice 2-drop, we can get a bit of that pressure, but you also really need that disruption, and that does not look like a lot of pressure because that's Marsh Flat's pass.
Yeah, maybe lots of 3 drops in hand does have that disruption, perhaps, but yeah, nothing to follow it up with Guide of Souls. And Guide of Souls, of the trio of Boros Energy 1 drops, is the one that's the weakest on its own. It really is there to support the other cards that Energy plays, and alone it's just a 1/2, and it's quite difficult to get to. More difficult with this iteration of the deck to get to 3 energy than before when you had Amped Raptor. I guess we're going quite a bit back now, but the Boros Energy deck is a little bit less explosive and less playing into energy, and therefore that Guide of Souls suffers as a result. I would say personally, I think it's the weakest of the 3/1 drops that energy does play.
Yeah, you can see it here compared to that. If we had an Ocelot Prime on turn 1, you'd already be developing, and this is the Thraven Charm to get rid of the Spelunking, but that still is a 2-for-1. Isaac still getting to replace that, still getting to get a land to play, and Aiden has a little bit of that disruption. It's lined up okay, but not perfectly.
Lithomantic Barrage takes down the Guide of Souls off the mana from the Crumbling Vestige. Wow. And Amulet is ahead on cards, on board.
And on life total, which is not where you want to be if you're the aggressive deck. You're going to hope that Aiden has maybe a Blood Moon or some incredibly powerful threat. That's a basic Plains. You'd have to assume no Seasoned Pyromancer is being cast off of that mana, and this looks like it's got to be a Blood Moon.
Absolutely. Simic Growth Chamber turning off after this Blood Moon. But Isaac does have a forest, so the game is going to continue.
Yeah, he's again. We've it's a Tales old as time. This Amulet deck has existed for a long time, and so has Blood Moon. And yeah, you've taken him off 1 mana from that Simic Growth Chamber, but he still has access to green mana. He has Green Sun Zenith, a threat that plays excellently into this Blood Moon, only costing 1 green to get threats.
We're going to see it again, and we're going to go for another Aftermath Analyst. Now, this is actually one that's come up over and over and over again. The Green Suns for 3, getting the Analyst. This is how the Amulet Titan grinds through this 8 piece. That's how they Simic Growth Chambers turn down from 2 to 1, and Amulet needs a lot of mana, and this is the way they do it. This 1 card, depending on how the mills go for Isaac Fox, could be bringing him straight up to 6 mana.
Yeah, it's looking tough, and we've got to hope that's not a great mill, only 1, but Aiden's looking to have some pressure that turn, or else it's going to be over pretty quickly. But we're going back to our main feature match. Owen has a pretty proactive start with the turn 1 Ragavan, which sometimes is pretty good in this Affinity deck, sometimes gets stonewalled by a Memnite, but it's kind of one of those high-risk, high-reward cards in the matchup that you can see that he chose to leave in, maybe just because he's on the play this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you about that one in sideboarding with the Ragavan. I recall in an earlier feature match where we did see the Is It Affinity against Jeskai Blake matchup, um, where Asha was playing Jeskai Affinity. They kept in Ragavan, and in the few moments we got to see of that game, it looked quite effective against the Affinity deck. We see Owen agrees, leaving in the Ragavan on the play, and it is getting it in for one. You talked about the Affinity deck boarding out some number of 0 mana artifacts. Memnite is one of the weaker ones, so perhaps they're trimming on that, and Owen is taking advantage.
And there are a lot of 0 mana artifacts that you can hit off this Is an Affinity deck, and this Mox Opal is only one treasure away from being able to make mana, so not the worst hit in the world for Owen. And you got to think that maybe the Ragavan, the appeal of it is kind of, we talk about, is it having this slower posturing in the post-board games, more counter spells, maybe trimming on zeros. Maybe you expect some of these cards to be less played. Maybe you expected there to be less Memnites, less cheap cards, less explosive games. And in that, Ragavan is kind of a powerful threat in a box, which pairs really well with a lot of interaction.
And we see, wow, this Fable of the Mirror Breaker, an ideal follow-up after the turn 1 Ragavan, but it does eat a Force Negation. Gavin realizing, well, I can't say this Force to protect against the wrath of this guy's. Owen is the one who's ahead on board. So he uses his Force Negation, which is actually huge, setting Owen down a treasure, further away from getting that Mox Opal active, which is hilarious. That's the one that's the hit. But he doesn't have any play. It's just Urza Saga and then go.
And this Ragavan looks absolutely incredible. It's not every day that you see the Izzet Effendi deck having 2 less artifacts than the opponent. Is that potentially another artifact thing to be cast, or that looks like a land that was moved away into exile?
Yeah, move just off the table, so we don't see. But if it was one Owen could play, then we would have it closer on the board.
And now with that Force of Negation gone, there are so many answers to Urza Saga, including this one, which is the March of Otherworldly Light, which is now being cast during the main phase. There's no second copy of Force Negation from Gavin Bennett. And he's correct, there is no second copy, and this game looks excellent for Owen. Gavin has nothing going on, and Owen's got all the permanents.
You still have to be scared because this Affinity deck so explosive. We know that he's holding for something, but what is it? And it's weapons manufacturing.
And this is one that gets around a lot of the counter spells from this Jeskai Blink deck, right? It gets around Consigned to Memory, it gets around Mystical Dispute, and this might be the swing that Gavin needed. Maybe they're see what those last couple of cards are. Hopefully, they're some amount of follow up, maybe an Engineer Explosives to leverage all these tokens. But for now, the board looks a lot more appealing for him than it did the turn before. But he still needs some way to get these tokens sacrificed or tapped to cast a large creature.
Yeah, you would wonder about which tokens that Gavin plays out. If he had an Engine Explosives, would he play it out or would he hold it even longer? He's played the minimum number of artifacts necessary to hold up a Metallic Rebuke. Now, Metallic Rebuke fast expiring, as Owen now has access to 6 mana on this turn and a 7th if he plays a land. However, there's no reason for Gavin to rush on the munitions, as there's no immediate way to make use of them. So he could have more zeros in his hand, or it could be payoffs or interaction. We are not sure.
Yeah, you have to think there's a reason why that Tormod's Crypt and Mox Opal were played there. And yeah, I think you're saying it. The Metallic Rebuke seems very likely, but there's a Mishra's Bauble in Exile that Owen can cast as well. So the amount of artifacts are just fantastic.
If a Mox Opal is not the best hit, Mishra's Bauble certainly is. And you see it being used for mana here, potentially along with some treasures. Owen could be using those to Wrath of the Skies to get rid of the board here, as he knows his Wrath of the Skies will destroy his own one. That looks to be what he's setting up, potentially. But yeah, Gavin, he would want to play out after his weapons manufacturing play some amount of artifacts to guarantee some number of munitions because of the March of Otherworldly Lights that are in Owen's deck. He's already used one, and it is a Wrath of the Skies that he plays, so giving up those treasures, that was Ragavan, and that Mox Opal to take care of Gavin's board. So yeah, Gavin needed to play a few so that the weapons manufacturing would do something if he had March, but not too many that he doesn't waste resources against Wrath of the Skies, and maybe he's found the sweet spot with 2, but with only 2 cards left in hand, we'll see if he'll be able to recover.
Yeah, it's looking like we gotta hopefully Owen make sure to cast that Mishra's Bauble, but it seems like he forgot to cast it, and that could end up being a huge punish. But Gavin seemed to have kind of gone into back of a more reasonable spot here with that weapons manufacturing trading off the powerful board of Owen, and now the
Wow.
Ragavan's on the board. He's lacking in a lot of pressure.
Galvanic Blast taking down that Ragavan, not one that I expected. I did not shout that one out in his sideboard, but Gavin's saying, okay, you have Felia, you have Ragavan, I'm trying to play a slower game. I need to answer these creatures.
But at the end of the day, this affinity deck makes a board of nowhere when it has artifacts in hand. With no artifacts in hand, it's really tough to imagine Gavin kind of grinding out this board with only 2 cards, and this Fable the Mirror Breaker is threatening to close the door, if not literally, but figuratively, very quickly.
Oh yeah, this Fable Resolve, no Force Negation left, and it's going to be tough for Gavin to recover because this card, maybe more than any other, is one that can snowball quite hard.
That's a Mishra's Bauble. That's drawing into a new card. And the look on Gavin's face, whatever that top card is not something that he wants to have to deal with. And we'll see what it is. Owen's probably excited to draw it based on that reaction from Gavin.
Oh
And
yeah,
table
this
tips
is
up to 2 here.
well, in the spot where you have to pray your opponent has nothing, but you see a good one from Mishra's Bauble, and the other bad ones, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, going to be cycling them away. But no, it looks like Owen is playing a land. He's keeping all the cards in his hand. That must be like rough from Gavin. Whenever your opponent Fable Chapter 2 and they keep everything, you know you are not in a good spot.
And that is probably the card he saw. You can see the nod of effective resignation from Gavin Bennett as Owen cast the Riddler.
We see Riddler and a card immediately being picked up. Gavin saying, oh, maybe I have a response. We're paused. The card suspended in midair. Players talking to each other. Not sure exactly what it's about, but again, Affinity is a blue deck. It has responses, so you can't just pick up your card right away.
Though
Gavin seems to be...
I guess Gavin's considering Mystical Dispute is the card he was thinking about cycling into.
Yeah, and there is a treasure on board for Owen, so Mystical Dispute wouldn't prevent the Riddler from coming down, but still, you need to give your opponent a chance to respond. So Gavin seems to be thinking about what he wants to do here, or maybe calling a judge to sort this situation out.
Yeah, there maybe was some, there's oftentimes why it's so important when you're playing these paper Magic events to be crystal clear with your communication about whether you're, when you're letting things resolve, the kind of verbiage you use. Maybe Owen thought that Gavin had said something, that indicated that. But see, we're moving on to to our backup feature match. And Aiden seems to have, from a spot that looked pretty dicey before, where Aiden had effectively 0 pressure against Gavin against Isaac having a bunch of mana up, and that Blood Moon was his only saving grace. He has cobbled into a pretty impressive looking board.
Yeah, absolutely. Those God of Souls going down, pairing extremely well with the Voice of Victory. Yeah, quite a turnaround, and here you have to think that's the same Aftermath analyst still on board was never able to sacrifice and return lands from play. That's because it was only one Boseiju that was milled over, if you recall, on that analyst trigger. So Isaac always having something else that he'd prefer to do with his mana, leave the analyst on board as a very vital 1/3 blocker. But now with these Guide of Souls, it's not going to be blocking for very much longer, as we've already got at the very least 2 triggers from those. I'm wondering about exactly how much energy Aiden has and when those God of Souls were played. But yeah, I'm surprised that maybe some creatures didn't have any 1/1/1 counters placed on them.
And you can see a Force of Vigor in hand from Isaac Fox. You have to assume that this was the draw.
Fire Spout.
Wow. That's another powerful one. Getting rid of everything including his own Aftermath analyst, the only thing's going to be left over, I guess, is that Voice of Victory. It looks like it has some dice on it.
Oh, okay, I guess I couldn't see the dice on it, but yeah, that would make a lot of sense if there were some placed on it, as with the double Guide of Souls, just a Voice of Victory attack is enough to jump that creature, as you can stack the triggers in a way such that the Guide of Souls are under it and the 2 tokens are created, and then you get enough energy to put the counters on it there.
And it does appear that Isaac has, it looks like there might be a Force of Vigor in hand as well.
And that's going to be quite a turnaround if he has a green card to pitch to it, plus a great follow-up play. Really turning a game where Aiden had looked like everything he needed into one where he could be falling behind very quickly. And there we finally see the dice moving back now, covering the art of the Voice of Victory. It looks to be a 4 on it. So that is a 5 power Voice of Victory plus 2 mobilized tokens getting in for 7 damage.
Yeah, but the Voice of Victory in play might be just the nail in the coffin here for Isaac. It doesn't enable a window for this Force of Vigor to be cast.
Oh, of course. Wow. What an amazing ability. And Voice of Victory coming up again. I completely missed that part of the card. Good catch. Yeah, Voice of Victory preventing spells, your opponent's playing spells in your turn. And that is huge against the Force of Vigor, as Isaac doesn't have the 2 green mana in order to cast it on his own turn.
Yeah, this is one of those games that looked like Aiden had interaction but no pressure. But it almost seems like the interaction was so good that it didn't matter, and Isaac and it drew the answer to the Blood Moon far too late. And you have to imagine this Voice of Victory's attacked a few times. We saw some other creatures in play. It'd be surprising if Isaac gets many more draw steps.
Well, we saw it got blocked once and then get in 1 hit, and there's another Grazer there, so maybe he's just trying to stay alive 1 or 2 more turns, but he definitely doesn't have much time. And as we return to our main feature match, it looks like the Quantum Riddler did resolve, did draw some cards. Gavin likely responded by cracking that Fiery Eyelid, but did not find what he was looking for, and he goes to his turn facing down a Ragavan and a Goblin Shaman and a treasure with that in Warp. And Strict Serenade catching this Pinnacle Emissary is going to leave Gavin in quite a poor position.
Yeah, the 2/2 can trade off with the Ragavan or the Goblin Shaman. That it does seem like that is not nearly enough for Gavin Bennett, who cracks another smiles as he kind of realizes that this is likely going to be going to a game 3. You see the Affinity deck can put so many powerful things in play, but it just has a really hard difficulty catching up once it has, once it's in one of these spots with no cards in hands. You just can't turn things into more things, and you're hard quality off the top. And this might be an exerted Quantum Riddler, as Owen goes for possibly lethal here, or close to it.
It'll be 8 attacking, and we do have a bird to block, but that's another 2 cards being drawn. Falling further behind on board, more treasures being created, and this Jeskai Blink really does. Things get out of hand once you have Fable going the whole distance.
Yeah, you have to imagine that this game might end before Owen even gets the opportunity to activate that reflection targeting the Quantum Riddler. And yeah, Owen's spot looks excellent here.
Yeah, we do have confirmation that Aiden took game 2. They're headed to a game 3, and this one is headed to a game 3 also. So game 3 in both of our semifinal matches. That means both of them will be playing one single game to determine who gets an invite to World Championship 2026.
And what more could you want as a spectator? What more could you want as a player? And what more could we want as commentators, getting lucky enough to watch even more high-stake Magic? It's really all what you want. And as we look back into the sideboards, maybe Owen's considering cutting those Ragavans, bringing them back out. Maybe they're much worse on the draw, but they looked incredible this game.
Yeah, we didn't see any Memnites played from Gavin, so if he's banking that those Memnites are gone, then I could see Ragavan staying in. That mana advantage is huge. If we know that some of Gavin's best interaction is Metallic Rebuke, which is based off of the amount of mana, like even into the Wrath of the Skies, that Ragavan gave Owen enough mana that he could develop immediately afterwards, also holding up that Strict Serenade.
Yeah, and another kind of point in favor of the Ragavan is when you're playing against a deck like Is It Affinity that has very, very few lands and a ton of zeros, there are so many reasonable incidental hits that you can get off it. We saw the Mox Opal doing work. There's a Mishra's Bauble that can be great. Ether Spellbomb could be powerful. You can hit a Memnite to add to your own board. So there's a lot of these kind of hits that aren't insanely game breaking on their own, but maybe add up to something a little bit more powerful. And is another point in Ragavan's favor, because you can Ragavan connect and hit a Mishra's Bauble. That's drawing a card and making a treasure. That's a huge, huge swing in his favor.
Absolutely. It could be a hedge against Blood Moon also. Affinity probably not boarding in the Blood Moon, although we have seen Blood Moon be effective against Jeskai in the past, sometimes out of that Boros Energy deck. Maybe it's a little different for the Affinity, but I'm not quite sure about that. But yeah, that Mishra's Bubble, like the Ragavan, even against, say, an Emery, like that's going to attack through. If you force Emery to be blocked, you can trade off, and then you can Wrath of the Skies the rest of the board. The Ragavan seems still pretty good to me there.
Yeah, and it'd be be hard pressed to want to change how that game went. It went fantastic. But as we've seen, this Is It Affinity deck is a menace on the play. It's got to be one of the decks that leverages that the best. You can oftentimes put a nearly insurmountable board before your opponent gets a chance to untap. But here it looks like we are going back to our backup feature match, and Isaac has what looks like a very good start with Amulet of Vigor and Spelunking, a couple of Crumbling Vestige.
Yeah,
The
shout out
mana
Crumbling
seems to be there.
Vestige. What an amazing card. Both allowing Isaac to cast that Amulet of Vigor on turn 1, so acting as an untapped land on turn 1. Then, since it enters tapped, it's acting as a bounce land almost on turn 2, allowing him to have 3 mana on turn 2 and 1 mana on turn 1. So really working hard this Crumbling Vestige. I know the rest of the cards get the attention, but that land is putting in a lot of work here.
So that's an interesting one. Isaac tanked a little bit and then chose not to put a land in play off the Spelunking. You have to think that if there were no lands, it would have been a bit of a faster pass. The kind of land that sticks out to me as something he could be considering is maybe the only land in hand is a Lotus Field. What other lands would you not look to put in play there?
Yeah, well, a Lotus Field would be almost a disaster to put into play. If you can't use that 3 mana right away, because the power of Lotus Field in this deck is really the explosiveness. He wants to have those Crumbling Vestiges untapped to go with it to bring him to 5 mana. I mean, 5 mana not the best number for Amulet also, but not only that is if you put a Lotus Field into play too early and then Aiden does have a Blood Moon, he won't be able to play it this turn, but maybe on turn 3. Now, Blood Moon is the most effective against any land is Lotus Field. It's the land it's the most effective against out of all of the lands in the Amulet deck.
Yeah, and we're looking at another double basic planes fetch from Aiden Mirbelli. You've got to think that's indicating that there's very likely that the 3 mana red enchantment is coming down next turn. And if you're Isaac, you're hoping that you can do some development before it gets a chance to take over the game. But with likely only 1 land or less in hand, it's hard to make some great things happen. If you have that Lotus Field only gets you up to 5 mana, it seems difficult to find where that 6 mana is going to come from without something like a second amulet.
Yeah, and that Voice of Victory being the turn 2 play, this could be the exact same pattern Aiden's setting up that he had in game 2 that strangled all of Isaac's outs.
Yeah, and Aiden might be squeezing out these two post-board games off that combo. There could be a chance there is no Blood Moon in hand, and that these are kind of preemptive fetches hoping to draw one. But there's a real cost of getting 2 basic planes, and you've got to think there's a very high chance that the 3 mana red enchantment is going to follow up.
Absolutely. So I think it is almost certainly to be a Blood Moon. The reason being that if Aiden had no other lands in his hand, he would probably fetch a Sacred Foundry here to be able to, cast any red cards that he might have or draw, such as Ragavan. And if he has other lands in hand, they're either additional fetch lands or it's going to be an Arena of Glory, right? And if it's an Arena of Glory, you're not fetching Plains. If it's an additional fetch land, you can go Plains Foundry and then use that third fetch land to fetch your Plains on turn 3. So I think this means this fetch for a Plains basically, to me, it tells it for sure that there's a Blood Moon in hand.
Yeah, and with another pass from Isaac, you've got to think if Blood Moon comes down here, the window closes rapidly. Guide of Souls plus Voice of Victory, that's already going to get a jump going this turn, even without any other creatures played. And that's 6 damage. That's
I would be,
a
sorry,
few turn clock.
to jump in that, I would be afraid of playing Blood Moon here if I was Aiden, just because of that Lotus Field. You mentioned Lotus Field. Imagine if Isaac has Lotus Field in hand. Aiden plays Blood Moon. Isaac plays Lotus Field. Now it does not trigger. Okay, because of the Blood Moon's in play, it's just a mountain. You don't have to sacrifice. And then if Isaac has something like a Fire Spout in hand, that could clear Aiden's entire board. Now it won't because of the Guide of Soul trigger this turn. He will have enough energy to put +1/+1 counters on at least one of his creature. But that could be some way for Isaac to get back into the game. You know that the amount of mana that Isaac can make next turn without a second amulet is not going to be too scary for you, right? Like he didn't do anything there. And so if you put a Blood Moon into play right now, you actually could be helping Isaac in the long run.
I'd be relatively shocked if there's a Blood Moon and it didn't get played, just because Isaac has no basic forest. Isaac has basically no land except for potentially a Lotus Field.
Yeah.
And if you can get that Blood Moon, but with knowing that your opponent can't play the Force of Vigor on your turn and also doesn't have any green mana, that's a tough place to be in.
Exactly. When describing it, I guess I didn't follow the line all the way through to the end. Is what you're playing around is Fire Spout plus Force of Vigor plus the Lotus Field. Then you're actually covered against that. So it doesn't quite work, but there are dismembers in the deck, which could take out that Voice of Victory at any time. But again, that dismember would have been cast if he had it. So yeah, I guess the Blood Moon there, but it's just something you have to be wary of, because I've seen Lotus Field punish Blood Moon before out in many spots, but there, based on the particulars of the game, it actually does seem safe to deploy. And moving back to our main feature match, we have a Urza's Saga start, double Memnites from Gavin. So maybe Gavin boarded those Memnites back in after getting brutalized by the Ragavan in game 2, or more likely had them in the whole time, but just did not draw it.
Yeah, and we can see Gavin, again, not the fastest start. It seems like a couple of lands, a couple of artifacts put into play, and then an Urza's Saga. And that Urza's Saga was protected by the Metallic Rebuke, but that doesn't do anything against the second copy of March of the Otherworldly Light. And now Gavin is kind of in the squeeze. He needs something powerful to follow it up with. Only 2 cards in hand. You've got to be happy if you're Owen here.
Yeah, I was counting to see if that meant a mulligan from Gavin, but no, just going first and then casting all these zeros and then the rebuke and getting your Saga exiled. This is a normal hand from him, but Owen has been able to answer the main threat. So it's really on Gavin to play a strong follow-up here.
Yeah, and it looks like Owen might be casting that Ragavan, but possibly just as something to trade off with, or no, that's the Prismatic Ending. Owen knows how scary it is when the too many artifacts can come to play, wants to keep Gavin off that Thoughtcast, off that Kappa Cannoneer, and Gavin with another Fiery Islet and attack for 1.
It'll be interesting to see what Gavin does with his Fiery Islet. It'll be telling about his hand, whether he cracks one of them or not. And he does not. So yeah, likely a big payoff in hand. That's why that Prismatic Ending on a lowly Memnite, a heads-up play from Owen.
Yeah, and now kind of asking another question and following that line, if Owen's got a consign here, it does feel kind of reasonable to cast it, but chooses not to, lets that Mishra's Bauble resolve, might not have an answer, and now the Thoughtcast hits the stack. That's the card that Gavin was setting up for, and the 2 cards are coming. Gavin is starting to rebuild.
Yeah, Gavin, of course, waiting after that Mishra's Bubble in play, aware of the interaction that Owen might have and giving him a chance to respond. And that Thoughtcast resolves, turn passes, Memnite not attacking into potential failure, and it looks like a plains being... Is that a basic plains or an island?
Looks
That
like
was
it. Looks like a
plains.
basic
It was an
plains that was
arid mesa,
fetched.
so it must be a plains of the fetch. Triple white in play. Now this is oh, we're plains going
Potentially not.
back to the hand. We'll see what it fetched, but triple white might indicate the need to Wrath of the Skies plus cast another white spell in the same turn. It does end up being a Thundering Falls being fetched on the end step.
It does feel that the chances that a Wrath of the Skies is there. Owen had no proactive play on turn 3, didn't interact with either of Gavin's spells, and now is just fetching a Surveil land. The hand's got to have something.
Yeah, absolutely. And the plains could have also been, there are Blood Moons in Gavin's sideboard. We're not sure if he is bringing them in, but it's something that Owen has to be aware of. Ophelia going to the graveyard off of this Surveil. No Felia played end of turn, but Felia going to the graveyard. So that does say a little bit about Owen's hand.
Yeah, it does. It does. It says that there's a copy of Felia. And Gavin, you saw a little bit of a reaction from Gavin when he saw that top card, just like it did in the last game. And that is a very powerful one. Quantum Riddler to pair perfectly with the Felia. And this game is going from bad to worse for Gavin Bennett, as Owen now has not only had the interaction, but has the pressure. And these two cards close the game quickly.
Yeah. So there was a Felia end of turn. I don't know why I thought there wasn't. He was just surveilling first before deploying it, and this makes a lot of sense. Now Owen is a dominating board position. No land played this turn. That means that he could have quite a big amount of interaction that he's representing here. Mystical Dispute in the hand, I believe, and this is a very difficult position for Gavin.
You're looking at Gavin's hand, you can see there's a Blood Moon, but no, it doesn't seem like there's any way to get that third bit of mana. And the Nod of Resignation, and wow.
Force Negation, Weapons Manufacturing, another Force Negation in hand, and no Wrath of the Skies needed. Just play creatures onto the board, and that was all it took for Owen to secure his spot in Worlds and make the finals of this regional championship. And he will be playing Aiden Mirabelli in the finals, who with his Boros Energy deck defeated Amulet Titan to claim his Worlds invite as well. Wow, what a tournament for both Owen and Aiden.
Yeah, that game, it kind of shows you how you beat this is an affinity deck. If you can interact with the one key piece, Gavin kind of bet it all on an Urza Saga, 2 March of Otherworldly Lights, one got Metallic Rebuke, the other one resolved, and there we go. Condolences to Gavin Bennett. 4th place is an excellent finish at the regional championships, but he will not yet be attending the World Championship. That reward goes to Owen Turcotte. Congratulations to him, and that's a huge win. And I'm excited to watch some more Boros versus Jeskai in the finals.
Yeah, and this is still such a good result for Gavin. He's been at these regional championships for a long time. I know he's lost win and ins before, so he'll still be extremely happy with this result. Losing playing for a Worlds invite is very tough. I've been in that spot also at a regional championship, losing playing for Worlds, but it'll come for him eventually, and he's in a good spot to try and play for it starting next year. Playing the first Pro Tour of 2026 means that if he can chain a few good results, then he can earn his spot into Worlds anyway.
Yeah, it's really, it's a tough place to be. You can look and see how close you are. But if you came into this weekend knowing that you'd get that PT invite and get the top 4, you'd be thrilled with that result. And I'm sure, it might sting for a little bit with Gavin, but he seems like a good sport about it. And I'm sure we'll see him back near the top tables. I feel like I see his name near the top tables at every one of these RCs, and I would be surprised if that changes in the future.